Hello and welcome back. What I want to do in this video is to show you how to create and use variables in your Python programs. But before we get into that, let's just take a moment to review what a program does. Most programs do three things. They 1. Get input from users, 2. They process the input, and 3. They produce output. For instance, Google is actually a good example of a program. It collects input from the user, it processes that input by searching its internet database for results, then it finally produces an output of related links. Of course, Google is much more complex than that, but that's what it does in basic terms. So input, processing, and output. Remember that. Okay, so the computer needs input. But what does it do with that input? In order to do something with the input, the computer has to remember it, or keep it somewhere. The computer keeps things, including input and the program itself, in its memory. You've probably heard of computer memory, but what does it really mean? Well, inside all those ones and zeros in your computer, there's a certain group of ones and zeros that stay unchanged. It's sort of like a group of switches. Those switches stay the same way until you change them. They remember where you set them. That's why it's called memory. You can write to the memory by setting the switches, or read from the memory by looking at how the switches are set without changing them. But how do we tell Python where in the memory to put something? And once it's there, how do we find it again? You see, in Python, if you want to write your program to remember something so you can use it later, all you have to do is give that thing a name, or a variable. Python will make a place for that thing in the computer's memory, whether that thing is a number, some text, a picture, or a piece of music. When you want to refer to that thing again, you just need to use the same variable. Let's use Python in interactive mode and find out more about variables. Let's type in the following into IDLE. Teacher equals Mr. Wells. Print teacher. Look what we did. We created our first variable. We just created a variable called teacher that's made up out of the letters Mr. Wells. In Python, the equal sign means to assign or make equal to. We assigned the name teacher to the string of letters Mr. Wells. A name is like a label, or a tag, or a sticky note that you attach to something to identify what it is. Somewhere in a chunk of your computer's memory, the letters Mr. Wells exist, but you don't need to know exactly where. You told Python that the name, or variable, for that series of letters is teacher, and that's how you'll refer to it from now on. You might be wondering why Python didn't print out teacher instead of Mr. Wells. When you put quotes around something, Python takes it literally. It prints exactly what's in the quotes. When you don't put quotes around the thing, Python has to figure out what the thing is. It could be a number, like 1, an expression, like 1 plus 1, or a variable, like teacher. Because you made the variable teacher, Python prints the thing that belongs to that variable, which happens to be the series of letters Mr. Wells. It's like if I told you, write down your address. You wouldn't write down the words, your address. That would be silly. You would write down your actual address, the place where you live. It's the same thing with variables. Each variable is an address to a location in your computer's memory. So when you say print teacher, it's going to print out the contents of the variable from somewhere in your computer's memory. Here's another example. Print quotes 10 plus 10. Now print 10 plus 10. There's a difference this time. Notice the first statement literally printed out 10 plus 10, while the second print statement actually computed 10 plus 10. With quotes, Python printed exactly what you told it, 10 plus 10. Without quotes, Python treated the numbers 10 plus 10 as a math expression, and it evaluated that expression to 10 plus 10, which equals 20. Alright, let's create some more variables. Let's try a little math. First is equal to 15. Second is equal to 25. Now let's print the first variable plus the second variable. Here we created two variables, first and second. Then we printed their sum. We could have also done third is equal to first plus second. And watch what happens if I just type in the name of the variable. Notice what we did here. In interactive mode, we can display the value of a variable just by typing its name, without using print. But remember, this does not work in a program. This only works in IDLE interactive mode. You can have more than one name for the same thing. Try this in interactive mode. My teacher is equal to Mr. Stephen. Your teacher is equal to my teacher. My teacher, and now your teacher. This is like sticking two name tags on the same thing. But you might be wondering, since variable your teacher is equal to the variable my teacher, what happens if you change the value of the variable my teacher? Does your teacher also change? Let's find out. So if I type in my teacher is now equal to Mr. David, my teacher will now be Mr. David, but what about your teacher? Your teacher, look at that, it's still Mr. Stephen. So the answer is no. What happened is that a new thing, Mr. David, is created. The variable my teacher gets pulled off of Mr. Stephen and stuck on Mr. David. You still have two different variables, but now they are stuck on two different things instead of being stuck on the same thing. If you want to have a string that spans more than one line, you have to use a special kind of string called a triple quoted string. Here's an example. If I wanted a variable, let's say a long variable, let's have it equal to, notice I put down 3 quotes, and then I'm just going to paste in a poem, and then end with 3 quotes. 1, 2, 3. And now that's my long variable. And now let's just see if it comes out. And there we go. I could have also done the same thing using single quotes if I wanted to. I could have done long variable 2 is equal to 1, 2, 3 single quotes, put in my poem, and then end with 3 quotes at the end. Works the same way. Triple quoted strings can be very useful when you have several lines of text that you want to display together, and you don't want to use a separate string for each line. You can name a Python variable almost anything you want. The name can be as long as you want, and it can have letters and numbers in it, as well as the underscore character. But there are a few rules about variable names. The first rule is that all variables are case sensitive. That means that this variable, name, is equal to Martin, is different from this variable, capital N, name, is equal to Justin. Notice that each of these variables are different names. So uppercase and lowercase are separate variables. The second rule is that all variables must start with the letter. That means you can't do something like this. Say I make a variable called for fun. This will not work. As you can see, I got a syntax error. Other than these two rules, you can pretty much name your variable anything you want. I could write a really long variable, and it would still work. You can even make a variable equal to itself. So let's try days is equal to 6. Now, days is equal to days. You might be thinking that was pretty useless, and you'd be right. It really doesn't do anything. But with one small tweak, we can make this incredibly useful. So let's try days is equal to days plus 1. Now let's print out days. Whoa, look at that! What happened here? First we set days equal to 6. Then we set days equal to days plus 1, or 6 plus 1, which is 7. So days ended up being equal to 7. When you make a variable equal to something, the variable always appears on the left side of the equal sign. The trick is that the variable can also appear on the right. This turns out to be quite useful, and you'll see it in a lot of programs. The most common use is to increment a variable, which means to increase it by a certain amount, like we just did, or the opposite, to decrement a variable, which means to decrease it by a certain amount. Here's another example. Let's try score is equal to 7. Now I'm going to increment this variable by typing score. So score is equal to score plus 2. Now if I print out score, and we get 9. So that's how you use variables in Python. Let's look at this number guessing game from the last video. We only used 3 variables in this program, and now already you can start to understand more of the code. Notice we used these 3 variables, secret, guess, and tries. Nothing else. And notice this part right here, you might not understand right now, but this simply returns a random number from 1 to 100. So all of these variables are numbers. And then we have these 2 print statements. And then finally over here, notice that we increment the variable tries after each try. We'll come back to this game in the next few videos. But right now, let's review what you've learned. You've learned how to remember or keep things in a computer's memory using variables, that variables are also called names, or variable names, that variables can be different kinds of things, such as numbers and strings, and you've also learned that there are 2 rules to making variables. 1, they are case sensitive, and 2, they must start with a letter. Alright, let's test what you've learned with a coding challenge. Make a variable and assign a number to it, any number you like. Then display your variable using print. Part 2. Modify your variable either by replacing the old value with the new value or by adding something to the old value. Display the new value using print. And finally, part 3. Make another variable and assign a string, some text, to it. Then display it using print. Now pause the video and try to do this on your own. Alright, assuming you've paused the video, here are the solutions to the coding challenge. So basically all you have to do is create a new Python file, go ahead and save it, and then type in your code and run it. See if your answers match this. Alright, I will see you in the next video. Happy coding!